Hello, welcome, Bonjour. My name is Erica Bailey Johnson, and I am running for Minnesota House 2B. And I'm really excited to do this. Is our last of our first week of a series of Zoom at Noon presentations. And I always have a special guest with me, or a good friend, and Jim Chamberlain's joining us today. He'll introduce himself in a little bit, but just wanted to kind of speak a little bit to what we're up to. Minnesota House 2B is a new redistricted space that covers all of White Earth and Leech Lake and a lot of very rural communities. So the largest town in my district is Bagley, about 1,200 people. And there's about 43,000 people in the district. So it's a lot of different spaces, a lot of lakes, a lot of farms, and that's where this idea came from. We thought that it would be a really good way to record these sessions and connect with voters in the district if they wanted to learn about these different topics. And these are topics that we started with this week that just were topics that I know a lot of people have asked about, like they're really interested in. They've asked me about either in my occupation as a sustainability director at Bemidji State University, or because I drive an electric car, or because we have solar panels on our house. So we have fielded a lot of different questions and thought that these would be, this would be a good way for people to access the information in a real clear, easy format whenever they would like. So really appreciate those of you that are with us today, and also those of you that will be watching later, and excited to talk about farming today. And I will just preface this one where I am not an expert on any of these conversations. My experience has been with farming is we moved up to Lake of the Woods County in 1985, and my dad bought an old farmstead up in Williams, Minnesota. So he farms some of that, mostly for hay. And we also in the 80s used the University of Minnesota Extension Service and purchased planted an acre of blueberries. So that was a lot of what I did in the summer, was manage and maintain and weed the blueberry patch. I know my mom was always really excited when I had friends over because it was more people to weed. So she would get us out there and weed in the blueberry patch. But I know farming is such an important part of the district that I will be representing. I'm excited to learn more from our special guest today. And so Jim, why don't you take a little bit of time to introduce yourself, and then just let me know when you want me to move the slides forward.
All right. Well, thanks, Erica. Yeah. Interesting district. Sounds like you're really spread out, but again, my name is Jim Chamberlain. I work for the nonprofit Happy Dancing Turtle. Full disclosure, Erica is one of our board members. So I work there as a conservation technician. I'm also a supervisor for the Crow Wing Soil and Water Conservation District. So I'm an elected politician. And my wife and I own a 108-acre farm east of Brainerd. And I've been here for about 27 or 28 years now. I think it'll be 28 years this fall. A little background, I've been a lifelong gardener. I got my first blue ribbon at the Anoka County Fair for a vegetable display when I was 11 or 12 years old. In the mid 80s, in my early 20s, I had some health issues and got really interested in organic agriculture, and got my first organic gardening subscription in 1986. And ever since then, I've been kind of trying to figure out how we could do this at scale. I been a longtime member of the Sustainable Farming Association, was board president there for about 6 years or so. And it wasn't until about 2008 where we really started to see some solutions for large scale changes on the landscape. landscape around, I guess, for lack of a better term, organic agriculture, or soil health in this case. But what I wanted to do today was kind of run through, I like to start with kind of the history since the Dust Bowl of the agricultural conservation in the US, just a short history on some of that success. And then talk a little bit about why I feel our conservation programs have failed us. And then get into soil health, define that, go over the principles on how you promote soil health on the landscape and on an agricultural landscape, and then talk a little bit about what I feel are solutions. So yeah, so most people have heard of the Dust Bowl and the black blizzards that came with that in the 30s. You know, dust from Texas and Oklahoma that was picked up and carried all the way to the East Coast and blown out into the Atlantic Ocean as far as 200 miles. What a lot of people don't know is that was kind of partially driven by government policy. The United States had signed a large wheat deal with Russia because they were in a drought, and then their drought lifted and they backed out of that contract. So the United States was stuck with a bunch of wheat that they couldn't use, and then a lot of fields laid fallow when the drought hit, and that kind of exacerbated the whole drought problem. You know, and this led to a lot of like dust pneumonia and plagues and all kinds of other issues that people have probably heard of. Next slide. Hugh Hammond Bennett was a soil scientist. He was the first chief of the Soil Conservation Service. He was the one that, the story goes that he was, when there was a Senate committee that was testifying to establish the Soil Conservation Service in the height of at the start of the Dust Bowl. On April 27th, Hugh Hammond Bennett had the weather report in his pocket, and he took the podium at 9 o'clock to talk in favor of the legislation. And about 11 o'clock, the windows went black. One of the senators got up and said that, you know, it looks like there's a storm coming, and another one said, no, I think that's dust. And they adjourned the session, they reconvened Congress, and they passed the the Soil Conservation Service legislation without a dissenting vote, which is a pretty cool story. By 1936, they had 5.5 million acres under conservation plans. And by 1937, they had reduced land erosion by 50%. Pretty dramatic success, I think. This led to the formation of the Soil Conservation Service, which is now the Natural Resource Conservation Service, or USDA branch of conservation branch. And then locally, the soil and water conservation districts were formed up until the 50s, but basically as a local support and kind of a check and balance with the federal government. Local soil and water conservation districts are just that. They're county-based agencies that promote voluntary conservation on the landscape.
Nice. Jim, do you want me to go to that Dust Bowl video?
Yeah, we could watch that briefly, I guess.
Okay.
I think it'd be good.
Let me see. I'm gonna share my sound, and that'll be good.
The Dust Bowl is the worst man-made ecological disaster in American history, a 10-year apocalypse superimposed over the worst economic cataclysm in the United States history, which was, of course, the Great Depression. This wasn't just a handful of storms, but literally hundreds of storms that picked up and rearranged the dirt of the southern plains in an area around the panhandle of Oklahoma, the panhandle of Texas, and bits of Kansas, Colorado, and New Mexico. It picked up the dirt and moved it all the way east, dumping many, many inches in Chicago, Detroit, darkening the skies in New York. This was grasslands that had evolved over thousands of years, that sent their roots down 5 feet to hold the moisture, but more importantly, to hold the topsoil. And when farmers moved in the 19-teens and 20s during a wet period and during World War I, there was such a mad dash to tear up this land. It was said people were wheat mad. And we tore up this area, tens of millions of acres, when the normal temperatures, which is semi-arid, almost desert-like conditions came, and the perpetual winds blow. And then all of a sudden you've got this drought affecting 46 of the 48 states. Well, in the southern plain, it just picks up this open, exposed soil and moves it. So the government came in and sort of said, time out. The Soil Conservation Service said, let's go back to the old plow. Let's do contour plowing. Let's rotate our crops. They were essential in teaching farmers techniques that helped to mitigate the effect of the dust storm and help keep and preserve what little topsoil was left in that area, and to return to grassland a significant part of that area so it acts as a buffer. And so we need to take the lessons not only of climate change, but of the Dust Bowl to begin to plan long-term for our future, to do something which human beings don't really like to do. We live in the moment. We're so sure, as those farmers did, there would always be rain, they would have bumper yields, and of course, it didn't happen. So the Dust Bowl is one of the great cautionary tales of all time. And what it's going to take is concerted will, not just on the part of farmers and communities, but states and a whole region, and indeed the federal government, to come up with farm practices that are going to be ultimately sustainable for the long term. Otherwise, we're facing the great fear that they had back in the 1930s, that this region of the country was going to turn into an American Sahara Desert. The toll of the Dust Bowl is incalculable. What's so great is that we have witnesses to it, and they remind us not only that history is alive, but that those memories that they recall are not something distant. It's on their hard drives now, and if you're able to access those memories, it's like a portal into the past. And that's the great gift of history. If you can make the past present, then that's going to wake people up and maybe signal to them we ought to get off our couches, get off our duffs, and get moving on these questions of conservation, of sustainability, of how to deal with climate change.
From the Southland and the drought land come the wife and kids and me.
Oh, I do really like that song. All right, now let me figure out how to get back to our, there we go. Or wait, what do you guys see?
Yep, that's the slide.
Okay. I can't see you guys at all. Yeah, so did that video turn out okay? Just want to make sure, because I know there's another one coming up.
It worked for me.
It worked, okay.
Yep.
Let me just try this. I don't know where you guys went for me, but I think that's the next one, Jim.
So this book, Conquest of the Land Through 7,000 Years, was basically the travels of R.W. Loudermilk, who was the Undersecretary for Hugh Hammond Bennett of the Soil Conservation Service in the 1930s and 40s. And what it's about is Hugh Hammond Bennett sent Dr. Loudermilk on what was to be a 2-year journey around the world to look at civilizations and how they farmed and how that affected their longevity and sustainability. And it kind of goes through the different cultures from China to the Mid East to Europe, and even some in Americas, of civilizations that thrived or failed, and basically found that, you know, the societies that took care of their soil were the ones that thrived and had longevity. And I guess I kind of see it now that we're kind of a global civilization. So unlike other cultures, we really don't have anywhere else to go. You know, it's our planet. There's only one left, and I think you know, the take home for me is we really need to treat our soil well. Next slide. One thing that disappoints me about that publication is it doesn't really talk much about Native American farming and their relationship with the land, which is pretty unique and very sustainable. So, you know, I think largely, if you look at how we're doing on our agricultural landscapes. Data from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency shows that somewhere around 60% to upwards of 95% of water bodies in agricultural dominated landscapes don't meet minimum water quality standards. And you combine that with some of the dead zones we have throughout the ocean, in our oceans throughout the world. There's some 250 dead zones, many of them the size of the one in the Gulf of Mexico or bigger. That, you know, in the United States, our conservation, the billions of dollars we spent on conservation aren't working. And I think I personally believe that's largely because we focused on conservation practices, not on principles that treat our soil well. This shirt here, I don't know, it's kind of blocked out on my screen, but this quote, "Science has yet to replicate what comes out the back end of a cow." And, you know, that's not just referring to the manure and urine that comes out of a cow, but also how that affects the microbes in the soil, the dung beetle populations that are related to those piles of dung, the physical impact that animals have on the landscape. So basically our agricultural focus on yield and soil chemistry to support that has been a major downfall in our agricultural landscapes. This tool that the USDA uses, this universal soil loss equation, basically figures out what a tolerable soil loss is, and that makes farmers eligible or ineligible for subsidy payments, crop insurance, and other tools like that, other payments. This tolerable soil losses, I believe 1.2 tons per acre in most places, some is higher. You know, is any soil loss tolerable is my question. And then other programs like the Conservation Reserve Program, which is wildly popular, but, you know, we'll put land and set it aside and not use it for agriculture for 10 years or 15 years or 20 or 25 years and pay farmers to do that. And then at the end, it can go back under the plow anyway. So we really didn't gain anything in the long term from those kind of set aside programs. And I think it also exacerbates this idea of the black hole of agricultural conservation, which I hear from resource professionals a lot. You know, that basically they've thrown in the towel on agriculture, that we can't do agriculture right. We can't solve these issues that we have in agriculture, and we need to set land aside. The Minnesota DNR has a current program where they want to plant 1 million acres of trees to address climate change and our water quality issues. And they'll come out and say, well, they have come out and said at meetings that most of this land is going to have to come off of our agricultural landscapes, our marginal landscapes, our marginal soils. And my question to them is, what are we going to eat? And I think it just perpetuates this idea that you can't farm without destroying the environment, and it's one that I just don't agree with. So, next comment, next slide. So in 2008, the Natural Resource Conservation Service started this soil health initiative, which for somebody that's been looking at organic agriculture since 1986 or so was pretty inspirational. You know, they defined soil health as the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem. So that living ecosystem part, recognizing that biology is important and that it plays a role in crop production. And then this function, this word in here, function, refers to the ability of soil to cycle nutrients and water, to infiltrate water and hold it in the soil profile, and to cycle nutrients, extract them from the soil and make them usable for plants. Is all this biology in the soil. This nutrient cycling is 85 to 90%, as high as 95%. I've heard of nutrient cycling that happens in the soil is through biology. So without the biology, we're really dependent on those chemical and mined and chemical fertilizers to produce our crops. Why is soil health important? You know, we've been seeing a lot of extreme rain events. The NRCS claims that for 1% increase in organic matter in your soil, you can hold as much as 25,000 gallons per acre of water. If we can do this on a large landscape scale, we can change a lot of, we can do a lot to reduce not only erosion and make farms more resilient to extreme drought and inundation, but we can also restore hydrology and prevent downstream flooding. Yeah, protecting water quality. And then the other one I like to talk about is why I think soil health is important is this biologically available N. We use a lot of synthetic nitrogen in our farm productions. If you look at this, the biology of that, we've reduced our microorganisms in the soil to the point where basically they're dominated by very hardy organisms, mostly bacteria that utilize that nitrogen when it's applied. What they do is they consume organic matter, and then when they die off, they release the nutrient, the nitrogen for that the plant can use. The big problem with that is you're depleting organic matter whenever you apply nitrogen. Also, somewhere around 30% or greater of that is leaching into our groundwater or off-gassing as nitric oxide, which is 160 times worse or so than carbon as far as a greenhouse gas. If we can support biologically available N, so this nitrogen from slow-acting nitrifiers and more diverse microorganisms in the soil, we can increase soil integrity and in the long term save farmers money by reducing inputs. So how we make this happen, what's really important is this plant microbe connection. So like I said previous, somewhere around 85 to 90% or more of soil fertility is through this biology. So how to promote these living organisms and how that happens is really important. And this really isn't new science. This Lorenz Hiltner talked about it in 1904, the rhizosphere he called it. But it's the unique population of microorganisms influenced by the chemicals released from the plant roots. Modern day, Dr. Elaine Ingham, one of my heroes, likes to call it plant snot. But basically it's photosynthate that the plant makes, that it exudes out of the roots. Somewhere between 30 and 50% of the photosynthate that a plant generates, instead of using to build the plant or the fruit and all that other stuff, is extruded out of the roots, and it does that to feed the microorganisms in the soil. And as Dr. Ingham explains, it releases these chemicals, this photosynthate or plant snot in her words, and they're eaten by that exudate is eaten by consumed by microorganisms, mostly bacteria, which are in turn eaten by larger and larger organisms. And when those organisms defecate or die, they release the nutrients the plant needs in the right form and the right balance for growth. And then there's other symbiosis that happens in that rhizosphere and with roots, and that one of those is the mycorrhizae fungi. Which isn't new science either. Sir Albert Howard, the father of organic agriculture, talked about this in 1934. His research showed that there was this fungus that had beneficial effects to plants, and he was largely dismissed as promoting magic. But we've known for 30 plus years, probably 35 years now, that mycorrhizae, which forms this symbiotic relationship with plants and actually either forms a glove or penetrates the root, and can take phosphorus in an unusable form and feed it to the plant, and in turn the plant feeds the mycorrhizae this plant exudate, and it converts a lot of that into a substance called globulin, which is a sticky humus-like substance that can hold that can absorb water and help form soil aggregate.
Jim, I was gonna say there's some really cool stuff coming out in the last few years around this whole topic, like some pretty cool research and a lot of indigenous knowledge, too, around the whole way that plants actually like communicate with each other under the soil. I know one place I read that like really what we mostly see above the ground is about a third of like the plant, you know, like about 2/3 of trees and all that are like busy under the soil, like getting along or not getting along. So there's all kinds of either sharing or like taking from each other these nutrients, but there's some pretty cool research that's happening around that. So I'm glad you brought this up.
Dr. Suzanne Simmerd out of University of Vancouver, I believe it is, talks a lot about this. She's a mycorrhizae expert, and she has a Radio Lab podcast called From Tree to Shining Tree, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so how do we build soil health on our soils? The NRCS has developed 5 soil health principles. I think they integrate livestock. One is included in most state soil health, NRCS soil health principle information. But these first 4 for sure: minimize soil disturbance. Anytime you disturb that soil, you're breaking up that home for the microorganisms. That can be either physical disturbance, so plowing or tilling, breaks up that soil structure and reduces habitat for those microorganisms and their ability to thrive. Chemicals, herbicides, pesticides also cause soil disturbance, so limiting their use is also important. Keeping the soil covered, or as Jay Fuhrer would say, keeping that soil armored. So keeping some kind of living cover or mulch on top of the soil at all times to prevent erosion and stabilize soil temperatures is important. Keeping living roots in the ground, and that comes back to that plant exudate. Most of the biotic glues that these microorganisms create that hold the soil together and create good soil structure, they have an average life of about 25 to 30 days. So unless those microorganisms, and by those biotic glues, the best example I can use is a worm. And if you've ever picked up a worm, which most people have, and have felt that slime on the outside of that worm, that's the biotic glue I'm talking about at a macroscopic scale. But this is at a microscopic scale, they do that as well. And if without the living roots in the ground to support that biology and create that biotic glues, those biotic glues that hold the soil together, your soil will just start to degrade over time. So keeping living roots in the ground to provide that base of the food chain for those microorganisms, for the living component in the soil is super important. And then increasing crop diversity, that for me comes back to this living roots thing. Different plants give off different types of exudate with different chemical makeup that attracts different types of microorganisms. So the more diverse your soil is above ground, the more diverse your microbial community is going to be below ground. And then the 5th one is one that I'm really passionate about personally, and that's this integrate livestock component. Our most fertile and abundant ecosystems, our savannas and our plains in North America, our prairies, were built with large herds of migratory animals. You know, somewhere between 60 and 100 million bison on this planet before the European colonization. And just recently I learned that on the Wisconsin-Minnesota border was home to one of the largest nesting colonies ever recorded of passenger pigeons, which are now extinct. But in the late 1980s or 1800s, I guess, I think it was 1876, they recorded a colony of 136 million nesting passenger pigeons. That does some disturbance to the landscape. So yeah, so mimicking that disturbance that those animals had, where they would come in and they would have a huge acute short-term disturbance. They would trample things, knock things over, defecate, do a huge amount of disturbance and destruction to the landscape. Typically, they would be closely bunched together in tight herds to protect themselves from predators. And then they would move on and they wouldn't return for a year or maybe 2 years before they came back to that site, allowing for a long recovery period. So that's what we're trying to mimic when we talk about integrating livestock. And then the last one that is pretty important is understanding context. So I see that in two different ways: understanding the context of the land and what it wants to produce. Not every native plant community is well suited for integrating livestock at a large scale. And then understanding the context of where farmers are at and where producers are at, and trying to meet them where they're at and move the needle, I guess, for lack of a better term, of
And
concept.
I like that passenger pigeon story was really cool. I mean, I can't even imagine what that would be like. Like, what'd you say, 136 like million?
136
Something like
million on about 800
Yeah.
square miles. So it
Wow.
worked out to about 250 nesting birds per acre
Wow.
when I did the math.
And I always think, like we see that as like, oh my God, like they disturb the land. But I kind of like, I'm always like thinking like, wow, like they're helping, like, yay, here they come. So it's just kind of a lot of it, I feel like, is your perspective of how you look at those, those ecosystem functions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and what we're trying to avoid is long-term chronic disturbance. So,
Yeah.
stuff that happens over a long period of time and long drawn out disturbance is what the landscape has a hard time recovering from.
Yes. Yep.
So how do we make this happen? I'll start by picking on our land grant university. We've lost a lot of the original intention of the land grant university. We've lost a lot of our extension agents. Much of the university is focused on chemical agriculture and what they call smart precision agriculture, which has a place, but it's a tool. It's a tool that could help us meet our principles, but it's not the solution to our problem. Our focus has to be on the soil health and the principles that get us there. So one of the really cool things going on at the University of Minnesota is the Forever Green program. They're doing a lot of work with hybrid hazelnuts, a really abundant species in our state and in the Midwest. And it's about the only plant that we can grow nuts on, protein on a bush, I like to say. They're crossing the European hazelnut with the American hazelnut. They've been doing this since the 1930s. Trying to increase the nut to shell ratio and make them more productive. Kernza is they're breeding a perennial wheat grass that comes back year after year that has quite a bit of potential, and then doing research on biennials for oil production. It'd be good to have more university support when it comes to restorative agriculture. It's a pretty small part of the university. And then I think there's huge technology, appropriate technology is going to make a huge difference. I think one of those where we're seeing that already is in soil testing, specifically around the biology, with the improvements in genetic testing. They can use mass assay genomic testing to determine soil biology and the components that's making that up. Not only determine what organisms are there and their abundance, but also what their exudates are and what that structure looks like, as well as other portions of the food chain, the carbon food chain, and other things like that. So, the testing to determine how alive and how healthy biologically a soil is getting better and better all the time, and cheaper. Soil respiration, you can get a soil respiration test for about $27 for a Savita test, I think. Basically microorganisms in the soil breathe in oxygen and give off carbon dioxide just like we do. So if you can measure that exchange, you'd get an idea of how alive that soil is. They've been trying to do that since the 1860s. They've been researching soil respiration rates, and just within the last 20 years, they've come up with technologies that make that cost effective and accurate.
Hey, Jim, what did you call that test again? What was the name?
Savita test.
How do you spell, like, SVIDA?
SOLVIA.
Soil Vida, like that?
TA.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I haven't heard of that before.
Could try to send you a link too.
Yeah, maybe put one in the chat would be good. Yeah.
Okay. And then something that I think it has a huge potential as an advocate for grazing animals is this fenceless technology. Well, fencing, I mean, modern day right now, what we have is, you know, the advances in polywire fencing and different fencing like that, high tensile electric fencing, making fencing options cheaper and more movable, more portable. So you can diversify your rotations and move things around more rapidly and more easily. And then this idea behind fenceless technology, fenceless grazing, where you're basically using a shock collar like you put on one of your pets, where you could set the perimeter of your fence with your smartphone and move your animals without even going out in the field. And you know when they get out of the fence because they're out of the perimeter because they're GPS guided. So still pretty expensive, but I think it has huge potential, especially if you get out in our real arid landscapes out west, where, you know, it's one cow per every 30 acres. I think it could be a huge game changer. My wife and I went out west on a trip last winter and drove through miles and miles of overgrazed rangeland. It's pretty sad. It needs a lot of help, and I think this fenceless technology could help do that. And then autonomous tractors. You know, I'll never forget, my dad spent 2 years working on his uncle's farm, and he talks about all the time he spent cultivating corn on his uncle's Allis Chalmers tractor with the 10-foot implement on the back. So, you know, our equipment's got bigger and bigger, so people don't have to spend so much time on tractors. But if we had autonomous tractors, then we didn't have to be there. Could we go to smaller equipment, diversify our fields again, and add some of those take some of those marginal areas that were opened up to straighten out fields to allow for this bigger equipment? Can we put that back into perennial cropping systems and make our landscapes more diverse?
Mm-hmm. Hey, Jim, can you give a real quick, I know I've heard of regenerative agriculture too. Like what's the difference between restorative agriculture and regenerative? Or are they kind of the same thing?
I think they're kind of the same.
Okay.
It's all terminology. You know, if it makes it better, it's restorative or regenerative, I guess. I don't know that there's a difference. I use them interchangeably. One of the things that I'm kind of excited about, and I don't know, I haven't been able to get much traction on it, but you know, we have the Conservation Corps, which was kind of modeled after the old Civilian Conservation Corps that grew out of the Dust Bowl and the Depression of the 1930s. But you know, to do some of this work, we need more boots on the ground. You know, I think technology and some of those things can help, but you know, my idea is a conservation grazing corps where we could get a bunch of young people with strong backs and lots of energy to get out and do some of this work on farms to help better utilize cost share dollars. A lot of times farmers can afford cost share, but they don't have a hard time actually getting the time to do the work over and above their regular work that they do. So, you know, could we bring in crews to help with fencing projects or other projects on the land, conservation projects? It would serve as a beginner farmer training program. We're going to need more farmers in the future. The average age of the farmer is somewhere around 60 years old. So where are the new farmers going to come from? And then this work around ecological services, using goats to control invasive species or using cows or other animals to support ecological restoration like oak savanna restoration or pine barrens restoration, stuff like that. Just one of my ideas that I think would be good to have. I've heard it offered up as a conservation farming corps as well. Yeah. Next slide. Okay, and if you could just play this video here of Gabe.
Okay, here we go. I got this one already loaded up too.
I think we should go to advertising.
The biggest benefit we're seeing from planting cover crops is the regeneration of our soils. When we first purchased this operation in 1991, our soil organic matter levels were 1.7 to 1.9%. Infiltration rate on precipitation was 1/2 of an inch of rainfall per hour. Today, because of 20+ years of zero-till, because of a very diverse crop rotation, the use of cover crops and the integration of livestock, our soil organic matter levels are now 5.3 to 6.1%, and our infiltration rate is over 8 inches of rainfall per hour. Every acre of our cropland, and we have approximately 2,000 acres of cropland, either has a cover crop growing before the cash crop, after the cash crop, or with the cash crop. But our goal is to have a living root in the ground as long as possible, feeding that soil biology. What we've done on our operation now is we haven't used synthetic fertilizer since 2008. We use no fungicides, no pesticides. We are using one herbicide pass approximately every 2 to 3 years. We're getting close to eliminating that also. We have 127 bushel proven dryland corn yield. County average is under 100. So we're over 25% higher than county average without all the costs involved. We're saving a tremendous amount of inputs. Our cost to produce a bushel of corn last year was $1.42. That included all the land costs, planting it, harvesting it, trucking it to market, everything. It's made least cost producers out of us. It's about the system, and it's about thinking holistically. We're not in this to make the most profit this year. We're in it to regenerate our soils and long-term profitability. And because we've gone to this type of a production model, we're able to produce our cash commodities at a fraction of the cost.
Cool.
So a lot of this progress around soil health has been farmer to farmer networking and farmers learning from other farmers. So Gabe Brown's been a great advocate for that. Poster child for soil health, I guess. This Wendell Berry quote that people are fed by the food industry, which pays no attention to health, and treated by health industry, which pays no attention to food. What I was saying earlier about the testing of soil biology and soil health and being able to better test how healthy a soil is has also helped us to better correlate the nutrient density in food, because we can test what a healthy soil is better. Then we can correlate that better to how nutrient dense our food is. What other health beneficial compounds, antioxidants, phytochemicals are in our food. And if you look at some of the work that's going on, I'm not going to be able to think of his name now, out of Ohio State University, where they're working on some of that research. They're finding, it's not so much the nutrient density of the food, the vitamins and minerals that they're finding that are so much higher from products growing on healthy soil, but those health boosting compounds, the antioxidants and the phytonutrients are off the charts. Where if you test a product coming off a degraded soil, whether that's a grain or vegetable crop or a grazed animal, you're going to find very few of those health boosting compounds. Where on a healthy soil, they're off the charts. It's pretty telling, I think. And I like to use the example of an egg. We raised chickens. We raised egg layers for 20 years when our kids were home. And, every winter, despite the fact that we fed an organic chicken feed, those yolks would get more and more pale throughout the winter. And within a week of the grass greening up and the bugs coming out and the chickens getting out on grass, those eggs would just explode with this bright orange color. And I don't need a scientific report to tell me that they're better. All I gotta do is taste one or look at it.
Yeah, we have chickens too, Jim, and notice the same thing. Yeah.
So, yeah, and then, this quote from Aldo Leopold that, we abuse the land because we regard it as a commodity to which we belong, or a commodity belonging to us. If we see it as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect. Yeah, we're kind of all in this together. We're all part of this community, and I think agriculture is the one that, when it comes to climate change and some of these environmental issues we have, I think there's few other things that have the compounding benefits of doing it right, like agriculture does. I know when it comes to climate change, it always goes back to the energy. It seems like it always goes back to the conversation or discussion, which can kind of be pretty divisive. Ratan Lal at Ohio State University claims we've lost as much carbon from our agricultural soils since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution than have been emitted from the burning of fossil fuels. I don't know how accurate that research is, but even if we stop burning fossil fuels today, we still have to do something with all that excess carbon that's in our soils, or that's in our waters and in our air. And, putting it back in the soil is the most logical thing to do with that.
Yeah, I really love your title on this last slide. I really love, agriculture when done well, like heals, we should be thinking about, and then I would say heals not only like ourselves, but also the land. So I really love that quote. And I guess like I'm really excited. I mean, I forgot to say at the beginning that I've grown up gardening. We're still gardeners. Like we have our own personal gardens like all the time, and really passionate about figuring this out. And I know sometimes it just feels like, anybody that's in which I am like very, environmental is going to be like arguing or fighting with farmers. And I just want to challenge that because I would love to figure this out to help farmers, to create this kind of future.
I don't blame farmers at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Farmers have done what the consultants, the crop consultants, our land grant university, our government, they're doing what they've been told to do.
Yes, incentivized to do, told to do. Yep. So I think we can figure this out. Mm-hmm.
And the beauty is that, if you can figure it out, you can really reduce a lot of your input costs.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to buy those chemicals that are getting more and more expensive. The price of nitrogen fertilizer has skyrocketed.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those kind of things that it's going to make it harder to farm that way, more expensive to farm that way. And if farmers can figure out how to use cover crops and other things to build that soil health and keep the yields up, but not have to buy all those inputs, I think that's huge.
Yeah, great presentation, Jim. Thanks so much for sharing. I wanted to see if we had any questions from anybody. We have, we can take a little bit of time. If anybody has any questions, you can either put them in the chat or you can unmute yourself. It would work too. But just want to really thank you for sharing, for being here, helping out with this. Like I said, this isn't something that I'm very knowledgeable in, like large scale farming, but I really would love to learn more and would love to help farmers, figure out that better future for themselves and for the land and the soil. So really interested in that. And then just wanted to, this is just the last slide where our team is gearing up today. We've got a big fundraiser tonight, it's going to be really awesome. We have music. Corey Medina and Brothers is going to be at Lake Bemidji State Park under the big old pines of the park from 6 to 9 tonight. So wanted to make sure everybody knows about that. And then there's all these different ways to get a hold of me and our team. So have all those connections on the bottom. But I think we have, oh yeah, you put that Solvita. Thanks. That link in the chat, Jim. Thanks for that. So that looks good.
Wish I could make it up to the concert. It's a long drive.
It'll be great. So I'm gonna go ahead and seeing no questions. I'm gonna, it looks like no questions for me. Thanks for the presentation. And thanks for your time, everybody, and have a great rest of your day. So I'm gonna hit